The Duke's Enchanted Bride Part 1. Chapter 1, The Seamstress of Hollow Lane. The village of Windmere woke slowly, as it always did, with the hush of morning mist still clinging to its eaves and cobbled streets. Market stalls creaked open, the scent of fresh bread and damp earth mingled in the air, and chimneys whispered thin curls of smoke into a pale sky. Madeline Dawson had already been awake for hours. Her fingers, nimble and calloused, danced across a bolt of pale blue satin as she worked the needle with practiced grace. Her small seamstress shop, tucked at the far end of Hollow Lane, was nothing grand. The window was cracked, the roof leaked when it rained, and the only decoration was a faded sketch of a noblewoman's gown, pinned to the wall like a dream too large to fold away. But the gowns Madeline stitched were exquisite, admired even in noble circles, though few would admit they wore dresses from a common girl. She was no ordinary girl, of course. She just didn't know it yet. The magic had always been there, a strange warmth in her fingertips when she touched certain fabrics, a prickling in the air when she concentrated too hard. She had learned to ignore it, just as she ignored the burn of the birthmark on her shoulder that sometimes glowed faintly in the dark. Magic was forbidden for commoners. Dangerous. Her mother, before her death, had warned her in whispers, "Hide it, Maddie. The world is not kind to girls like you." And so she hid it. She stitched her talent into seams and hems, concealed her gift beneath thread and thimble. She earned just enough coin to eat, and sometimes even managed to laugh. It wasn't a grand life, but it was hers. On this particular morning, as she fitted a hem for the baker's wife, a commotion stirred outside. The sound of hooves. Shouted greetings. Nervous murmurs. Madeline peered through the window, brushing her dark curls from her face, and froze. A small procession was winding its way through Windmere's narrow main road, and at its center rode a man astride a midnight black horse. He wore a deep green riding coat with silver fastenings, his dark hair wind-tossed, his expression distant yet commanding. The villagers dipped their heads, bowing slightly, eyes wide with reverence and curiosity. Madeline didn't need to ask who he was. Brandon Vine, the Duke of Greymoor, had come to Windmere. He was a war hero, a nobleman of rare rank, and a whispered legend among the common folk. The Duke who never smiled. The Duke who had once turned a dragon to ash with a single sword stroke. The Duke who had returned from the northern front lines carrying scars no one could see. And now he was here, in her village. Madeline stepped back from the window, her heart inexplicably racing. What business would a man like that have in Windmere? Her shop was of no consequence to someone like him. But fate, as it so often does in stories like these, had already begun to sow its thread. A sharp cry broke through the murmurs outside. Madeline rushed to the door and saw the baker's daughter, no older than 6, lying on the ground, her small body trembling, her face pale. A runaway horse had kicked over a cart, and the child had been caught beneath it. Before she could think, Madeline was running. She reached the girl in moments. Her hands moved of their own accord, gently brushing the child's temple. Her eyes fluttered open, glassy and full of pain. The wound was shallow, but blood streaked her cheek. Something sparked inside Madeline. She pressed her palm to the girl's skin. The world seemed to fall silent around her. Warmth surged from her fingertips, and a soft golden light flickered, just for an instant. The bleeding slowed. The girl whimpered, then breathed deeply, the color returning to her cheeks. Only when it was done did Madeline realize what she had done. Gasps rippled through the small crowd. One or two villagers looked away, unwilling to have seen what they'd just seen. Others stared, mouths agape. Magic. In plain sight. Madeline's eyes darted to the man on the black horse. Brandon Vine was no longer watching the road. He was watching her. Not with scorn. Not with fear. But with a look she couldn't name, something sharp, curious, and impossibly intense. Their eyes locked. Madeline felt her cheeks burn. She turned quickly, scooping the child into her arms. She handed her to the mother, murmured something about needing rest, and fled back to her shop before anyone could speak. Behind her, the Duke dismounted his horse. "Who is she?" he asked quietly, to no one in particular. No one answered. But the first thread had been drawn between them. And like all threads in stories spun of fate and forbidden love, it would not be easily broken. Chapter 2, The Glowing Thread. The day after the incident in the village passed quietly. Too quietly. Madeline Dawson had spent the night tossing in her narrow bed, heart hammering, replaying the moment in the street again and again. The golden light. The silence. The Duke's gaze. She had exposed herself, however briefly, and though no one had come knocking in the dark hours of the night, the risk still gnawed at her like moths through silk. She rose early, as always, throwing herself into her work, pretending nothing had changed. The shop needed cleaning, dresses needed stitching, and she had a noble's commission due by week's end, a velvet gown trimmed in silver lace, to be worn at the Harvest Court Gala. But her hands wouldn't stop shaking. It wasn't just fear. It was something else. An energy stirred inside her, restless and bright, as though something long buried had cracked open the day before. She tried to ignore it. By late morning, she'd convinced herself she was safe. The villagers were keeping quiet, either out of fear or loyalty, or perhaps because they didn't truly believe what they'd seen. Either way, it seemed the danger had passed. Until the bell above her shop door rang. Madeline looked up from her table and nearly dropped her scissors. Standing in the doorway, framed by sunlight, was Duke Brandon Vine. He was dressed less formally than he had been during the procession, though the noble cut of his coat and the carved silver clasp at his throat left no doubt as to his identity. His eyes, cool gray, sharp as frost, swept across the little shop before settling on her. Madeline stood so quickly she knocked over her stool. "My lord," she said, curtsying far too quickly. "You honor me with your presence." He stepped inside, quiet and unhurried. "Miss Dawson, is it?" She nodded, unable to speak. "I was told this is the finest seamstress shop in Windermere," he said. "I thought I would see for myself." She blinked. Was this a game? A trap? She offered a polite smile. "Then I hope it does not disappoint, Your Grace." Brandon's eyes drifted toward a dress on the mannequin, deep green satin, half finished, its hem pinned and waiting. "Who is this one for?" "A local baroness," she said. "For the Harvest Gala." He stepped closer to the dress, then to the table. A loose thread caught his attention, a shimmering strand of embroidery thread, finer than silk, glowing faintly under the morning light. Madeline froze. Not again. The thread had been ordinary yesterday. She was sure of it. But now, as if reacting to his presence, or her fear, it shimmered faintly gold. She snatched it from the table, hiding it behind her back. "Forgive me, that one's flawed. I'll dispose of it." But Brandon didn't flinch. Instead, he looked at her the way a man might study a puzzle he almost recognized. "You were the one who helped the baker's daughter," he said quietly. "Yesterday." Madeline's breath caught. I only cleaned her wound." "Not what I saw," he said. Her throat tightened. "With respect, Your Grace, it was nothing." He studied her a moment longer. "Magic is nothing in the hands of fools. But in the right hands, it changes everything." Madeline's heart thundered. "I won't report you," he added, voice low. "But others will. You know that." She nodded slowly. Her legs felt weak. "Come to the estate tomorrow," he said. "I have a commission for you. Something special. Discreet." "Why, she asked before she could stop herself. He hesitated only a moment. Because I believe talent should be rewarded, he said. And because, you interest me, Miss Dawson. And with that, he turned and walked out, leaving her heart pounding in the silence. Madeline stared at the closed door for a long time, still clutching the glowing thread. She didn't know if he was friend or foe. But something had changed, and she could feel it in her bones. The thread of her life, once simple and unremarkable, had been pulled into something larger than she'd ever imagined. And Brandon Vine, Duke of Greymoor, hero of the realm, had just taken hold of it. Chapter 3, A Glance That Lingers. The following day dawned under a silver sky, with clouds thick as wool and the faint taste of rain in the air. Madeline dressed carefully, her nerves strung tight beneath her plain grey cloak. She didn't know what she expected from the Duke's estate, or why he had truly summoned her, but she knew that saying no to such a request was not an option. She walked the winding path beyond Windermere's outskirts, through golden fields and past the willow-lined banks of the Arlen River. And then, rising ahead of her like a dark jewel set into the hills, appeared Greymoor Hall. The estate was vast and imposing, stone towers veiled in ivy, high windows staring down like watchful eyes. It was nothing like the cozy warmth of Windermere. This was a place of power. At the gates, a guard stepped aside without a word. Apparently, she had been expected. Inside, the halls were eerily quiet. A maid led her through polished corridors and up a grand staircase, until at last she was shown into a drawing room where a fire crackled in a carved hearth and books lined the walls like silent witnesses. And there he was. Brandon Vine stood at the far window, silhouetted against the light, hands clasped behind his back. He turned slowly as she entered. "Miss Dawson," he said. "Thank you for coming." Madeline curtsied stiffly. "Your Grace." He motioned toward a table where rich fabric lay draped over the edge, a deep crimson velvet unlike any she had ever worked with. "I need a formal coat made for a royal council gathering," he said. "Something worthy of my station, but less ostentatious than what court tailors usually craft." Madeline stepped forward, fingertips brushing the fabric. It practically sang beneath her touch. There was something enchanted about it, woven, perhaps, with subtle wards or noble alchemy. Of course there would be. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "And very fine work will be needed. That's why I chose you." She glanced up at him, startled. "You could have any tailor in the capital." "I don't want any tailor. I want you." The words hung in the air between them, carefully chosen, but not accidental. Madeline swallowed. She could feel the warmth returning to her fingertips. That strange, restless energy hadn't left her since the moment in the street. In fact, it had grown stronger. Brighter. And now, here, standing in the same room as him again, it shimmered beneath her skin like sunlight on water. He stepped closer, eyes searching hers. "You have a gift, Madeline. A rare one." "I'm not what you think," she said quietly. "I didn't choose it. No one chooses what they're born with. But what you do with it, that is a choice." Her eyes fell. "Most people would call it a curse." He was silent a moment. "Then, my mother was like you." She looked up, surprised. "Gifted," he clarified. "But afraid to show it. She died before I could understand what she truly was. Since then, I've learned to recognize that spark." Madeline's voice was barely above a whisper. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I see the same fire in you," he said. "And because I suspect you have no one else to speak to honestly." Am I wrong? 1,000 thoughts tangled in her head, fear, suspicion, confusion, and something else she didn't dare name. But she shook her head. "No," she said softly. "You're not wrong." His gaze lingered on her a moment longer. Not cold or cruel, but curious. Intrigued. Then he stepped back, returning to the hearth. "The gala is in 5 days," he said. "Can you finish the coat by then?" Madeline gathered her breath, retreating to the comfort of her craft. "If I have a proper workroom and access to the fabric here, yes." "You'll have both," he said. "A room has been prepared for you in the East Wing. You may stay until the commission is complete." She looked at him sharply. "Stay here." Brandon's brow lifted slightly. "It's practical. And discreet. Wouldn't want word getting out that the Duke was wandering down Hollow Lane every day for fittings." Madeline flushed. "Of course." A pause. And then, just before she turned to go, he said, "There will be a masquerade ball the night of the gala. You should attend." "I'm a seamstress," she replied, startled. "You'll be my guest," he said. "No one will dare question it." And in that moment, beneath the flicker of candlelight, with the Duke's steady eyes on hers, something changed. A thread tightened. A glance lingered. And the first spark of something dangerous began to kindle between them. Chapter 4, The Masquerade Temptation. For 3 days, Madeline Dawson lived in the east wing of Greymoor Hall as if caught in a waking dream. Each morning, she rose before the sun, her fingers already itching to work. The Duke's coat was no simple garment, it was an exquisite commission of royal velvet and embroidered silver thread, designed to whisper elegance while commanding awe. She poured herself into the task. Each stitch, each line, became a way to forget the uncertainty she felt living beneath the same roof as Duke Brandon Vine. She saw him only rarely, passing glances in shadowed hallways, a brief nod in the library, a murmured comment at dinner. But always, there was that tension in the air. The unspoken pull between them. And then, on the 4th night, her breath caught when she opened her workroom door and found a box resting on her table. No note. No explanation. Just the box. Inside was a dress. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, woven from midnight blue silk that shimmered like starlight, with delicate silver beading along the sleeves and hem. A mask, pale as moonlight and trimmed with filigree, lay folded within. At the very bottom, a card, for the masquerade. "You should be seen." Her hands trembled as she held the fabric. There was no mistaking what this meant. She tried to argue with herself. She was a seamstress. A commoner. She had no place at a masquerade filled with nobles, lords, and ladies. And yet, what harm could one night do? If she wore the mask, no one would know her. She could disappear into the illusion, just for a moment. Just for the dance. That night, the manor was alive with light. Candles flickered in every window, and the grand ballroom glowed with enchanted lanterns that floated like stars beneath the vaulted ceiling. Music drifted through the air, harps, violins, the soft rhythm of a waltz. Laughter bubbled like champagne, and the guests arrived draped in jewels, silks, and mystery. Madeline stood at the edge of the room, heart racing beneath her mask. The gown clung to her like a second skin, elegant and impossible. No one glanced at her as she entered. They didn't recognize her. She was no longer the poor seamstress from Hollow Lane. She was someone else entirely. She moved through the ballroom slowly, afraid to be noticed and somehow more afraid not to be. Masks fluttered past, some laughing, some whispering secrets, others dancing with strangers as if they'd known them all their lives. And then, across the room, she saw him. Brandon Vine stood at the head of the ballroom, speaking quietly with a councilman, dressed in the very coat she had sewn. It fit him perfectly, sharp lines, powerful shoulders, understated magnificence. And when he turned his head slightly, as if sensing her eyes, their gazes met. Even with the mask, he knew her. He didn't smile. But something sparked in his eyes, a flicker of surprise, quickly masked with calm. He excused himself and moved through the crowd like a shadow. And suddenly, he was in front of her. "You wore it," he said, low enough for only her to hear. Madeline lifted her chin. It would have been rude not to. He extended his hand. "Dance with me." She hesitated. The music shifted, slow, graceful, romantic. People were watching. Whispers began to ripple through the ballroom. But she placed her hand in his. And they danced. She had never danced like this before. Not with a noble. Not under such light. His hand on her waist was firm and respectful, but his touch made her skin burn. They moved in time, perfectly, like they had danced this way in another life. "Everyone's staring," she whispered. "They always stare," he replied, "but they rarely see." "Is this a game to you?" she asked, trying to ignore how her body responded to his closeness. "No. And if it were? I think I'm already losing." The music swelled. He spun her gently, and for a moment her eyes closed, heart pounding, magic thrumming just beneath her skin. She didn't care what anyone thought. Not tonight. Not while the stars glowed above them and his hand held hers like she was something rare. When the dance ended, silence followed for a heartbeat. Then applause broke out, polite but pointed. People were watching. Judging. Behind their masks, the nobility's eyes narrowed like blades. They didn't know who she was, but they knew she wasn't one of them. Brandon stepped back, offered her a slight bow, and said only, "Come with me." She followed him out of the ballroom, through a corridor lit with flickering sconces, until they reached a quiet alcove. From there, the sounds of music and voices faded into the distance. He turned to face her. "You don't belong to them," he said. "Not the nobles. Not the council. You don't belong in the shadows either." "I don't belong anywhere," she whispered. "I'm a seamstress with magic in her blood and a name no one cares about." "I care," he said, voice rougher than before. "You saved a life. You risked your own. You create beauty with your hands and hide your light because this world is too blind to see it. But I see you, Madeline." Her breath caught. He stepped closer. Not touching her, just close enough for her heart to forget how to beat properly. "I won't let them come for you," he said. "Not while I still draw breath." She could barely speak. "Why?" His answer was quiet. Barely more than a whisper. "Because since the moment I saw you, I haven't been able to stop." Then someone called his name. They stepped apart as hurried footsteps echoed down the hall. A court attendant rounded the corner and bowed. "My lord. You're needed at once." "A dispute at the council table." Brandon glanced back at her, torn. "Stay here. I'll come back." And then he was gone. Madeline stood alone in the darkened corridor, hands still trembling from the echo of his touch. The ballroom buzzed beyond the walls. Her mask was still in place. Her name unknown. But tonight, she had tasted something dangerous. Something forbidden. And as the magic stirred faintly under her skin, Madeline knew, this was only the beginning. Chapter 5, The Burning Mark. The echoes of the masquerade clung to Madeline Dawson like perfume, haunting, heady, and impossible to forget. She barely slept that night. Even hours after the last notes of the waltz had faded and the ballroom had emptied of laughter and whispers, she stood at the tall windows of her guest chamber in Greymoor Hall, still wearing the midnight blue gown. The mask lay on the floor beside her, forgotten. Her skin still tingled where his hands had held her waist. Her heart still fluttered with the memory of his voice, low, reverent, as if speaking to something fragile and precious. "I see you, Madeline." She didn't know what scared her more, that he meant it, or that she wanted so badly for it to be true. By morning, she had resolved to lock it away. To return to her sewing, to the safety of her craft, to the silence of her past. Dreams were dangerous things. She had lived her whole life pushing them down. But some dreams don't stay buried. The next day was quiet. The Duke had been called to the capital on council business. Word was he wouldn't return for at least 2 days. Madeline should have been relieved. Instead, she was restless. She spent the hours reviewing every seam of the formal coat, adjusting the collar one last time, inspecting the silver thread embroidery she'd stitched into the lining, a subtle motif of rising stars. But by late afternoon, her mind drifted to the scrolls in the manor library. They weren't just books of noble family trees and war records. Among them were volumes of magical lore, some hidden in the back of shelves, others sealed in glass cases, quietly humming with old power. Drawn by something she couldn't name, Madeline slipped into the library as the sky turned gray. She scanned the spines until she found one that made her pause. Of Starborn Blood and Cursed Flame. The title struck her like a whisper in the dark. She pulled the book free. It was old, bound in cracked leather, with a symbol on the cover, a circle of stars, almost identical to the birthmark on her shoulder. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The pages spoke of a once noble bloodline, long forgotten, whose members had been born under rare celestial alignments. These starborn were said to possess unstable but profound magic, powers that defied ordinary sorcery. Feared, hunted, and eventually erased from court records, the starborn line had vanished after a great purge nearly 2 decades ago. But not entirely. Madeline closed the book slowly, her breath shallow. The date matched the year she had been found on the doorstep of the old Windmere midwife. The year her mother had died. The year everything in her life had begun with a silence no one ever explained. Suddenly, a sharp heat pierced her shoulder. She gasped, clutching at her skin. The birthmark, the strange, curling shape just below her collarbone, was burning. She stumbled to the nearest mirror, pulling down the fabric of her dress. Her reflection showed the same familiar mark, but it was glowing. Faint, golden light pulsed from it in rhythm with her heartbeat, the edges alive like embers. A knock at the library door made her spin. It was Seraphina Duskmore, Brandon's betrothed. The last woman Madeline wanted to see. She stood in the doorway like she owned the air, her gown the color of storm clouds, her expression a mask of noble courtesy stretched too tightly over something venomous. My, Seraphina said softly, stepping into the room. Imagine my surprise, finding the seamstress alone in the Duke's private library. Madeline pulled her dress quickly back into place. I was asked to make adjustments to the coat. Seraphina smiled, all teeth. I see, she said. And were you asked to dance with him, too? To wear that charming little gown? To attend a masquerade as if you belonged there? Madeline's hands clenched at her sides. I wore what was given to me. Yes, you did, Seraphina said, circling her like a hawk. You wore his attention. His protection. His name, almost. I'm just a seamstress. No. You're a danger. Her voice dropped. You've bewitched him. But it won't last. I haven't. Oh, but you have, Seraphina hissed, all pretense gone. His father was the same, weak when it came to girls with glowing eyes and unnatural gifts. Do you think I don't know what you are? Madeline's blood ran cold. Seraphina leaned in closer, voice like a dagger. This house, this title, that man, none of it will ever belong to someone like you. So I suggest you pack your needles and disappear. Before someone less merciful than I finds out what's hidden beneath your skin. Then she turned on her heel and swept from the room. Madeline stood frozen, trembling. As soon as the door clicked shut, her birthmark flared again, violently. This time, the heat was unbearable. She dropped to her knees, biting back a cry as the fire surged through her chest. Her hands sparked with wild, golden light, not controlled, not gentle, but raw and chaotic. The energy pulsed outward in an arc, hitting the nearest bookshelf. Books exploded from the shelves, a gust of invisible force toppling an entire case. The lights in the library flickered. And then it stopped. Silence returned. Madeline knelt on the carpet, panting, staring at her hands as the glow faded from her skin. The birthmark dulled to nothing more than a faint shimmer. The air smelled of ozone and fear. She realized then what Serafina must already suspect. She wasn't just gifted. She was dangerous. Something inside her was waking, and it wasn't coming quietly. And worst of all, Brandon wasn't here. Chapter 6, The Duke's Garden. Brandon Vine returned to Greymoor Hall at dawn, after 2 sleepless nights in the capital. The council meeting had been worse than expected, full of veiled threats and nobles too proud to admit their kingdom teetered on a precipice. The rumors of unrest in the outer provinces were growing louder. And then there were whispers, dangerous ones, about rogue magic stirring again, of ancient bloodlines thought long gone reappearing in unlikely places. He didn't need to ask where those whispers had started. He knew exactly who they were about. As his horse clattered up the gravel path to the estate, Brandon's eyes instinctively lifted to the east wing. To the window that overlooked the gardens. To the room where he had let her stay. Madeline. He didn't know what she truly was yet, but he knew what he saw when he looked at her, a girl caught in a storm not of her making, blazing with magic and grace, and still stubborn enough to stand her ground in a world that feared both. And God's help him, he couldn't stop thinking about her. She didn't greet him when he entered the manor. In fact, the staff seemed unusually quiet. It wasn't until one of the younger maids passed by, pale-faced and hesitant, that he learned the truth. There was an incident, Your Grace, the girl whispered. In the library. Bookshelves collapsed. Magic, we think. Miss Dawson hasn't left her room since. Brandon was already moving before she finished speaking. He found Madeline in the manor's overgrown garden, not her room after all, sitting beneath an ancient, flowering tree whose branches bent low with lavender blossoms. Her back was to him, her dress wrinkled and damp at the hem. She was barefoot in the morning dew. He approached quietly, but not quietly enough. I know you're there, she said, voice hoarse. I just arrived, he said. She didn't turn. There was a long pause before she finally spoke again. The birthmark, it burned. And then, something happened. You lost control, Brandon said gently. I didn't mean to. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I know. She glanced back at him then, her expression tired but fierce. But it still happened. He stepped closer, lowering himself to sit beside her. The garden was wild and untended, vines creeping up crumbling statues, flowers blooming defiantly in patches where they shouldn't. Somehow, it suited her. Do you know what you are? He asked quietly. I think so. She looked down at her hands. I read a book. Of starborn blood and cursed flame. Brandon's jaw tightened. He'd read that book, too. Or rather, he'd been made to read it, as a boy, so he'd know the kind of girl he should never trust. I was born under a star alignment, Madeline continued. My mother must have been, too. That mark on my shoulder, it's the same as the one in the book. Which means, Brandon said carefully, you're not just magical. You're starborn. She nodded, then added in a whisper, the last of them. Brandon said nothing for a long time. The only sound was the rustle of leaves overhead and the distant birdsong. At last, she spoke again. I should leave. He looked at her sharply. No. I've caused damage. I've drawn attention. And Serafina, she knows. Or suspects. Serafina is many things, Brandon said, but she doesn't hold sway over this estate. Not while I live. Madeline turned to him fully now, frustration in her voice. Brandon, I don't want to be protected. I want to be safe. And I'm not. I'm not safe anywhere. Not in Windmere, not here, not even in my own skin. He reached out and took her hand. It was a risk, an intimacy, but he didn't care. You may not be safe, he said softly, but you are not alone. Her eyes met his then, open, vulnerable, shining with unshed tears. Why are you doing this? You barely know me. Because I know the world, he replied. I know how it crushes the ones who burn too brightly. And I've watched too many fall without anyone reaching for them. He paused. And because, if I'm being honest, I do know you. Not everything. But enough. Enough to know that when I saw you touch that child's cheek and heal her with nothing but your hands, I saw more courage in that moment than I've seen in the council chamber in 5 years. A tear slid down her cheek. He didn't wipe it away. He just held her hand tighter. I can't promise you safety, he said. But I can promise this, if they come for you, they'll have to come through me. They sat there a long time in silence, surrounded by wild roses and crooked stone paths, both of them bracing for the storm that had already begun to gather beyond the hills. And beneath the earth, deep in roots older than the manor itself, something ancient stirred. The starborn had awakened. And Eldoria would never be the same again. Chapter 7, The Shadow of Seraphina. The days after the incident in the library passed under a fragile calm, like the hush before a storm breaks over the sea. Brandon had quietly returned to his council duties, retreating to the war room and court correspondence during daylight hours. Madeline remained in the east wing, finishing the final embellishments on his formal coat, her fingers moving with mechanical precision. But neither of them were the same. Something had shifted in the garden that morning. Madeline still felt the memory of his hand in hers, not possessive, not demanding, but steady. Solid. And in her world of unraveling truths and waking magic, that had felt like something close to safety. But not everyone in Greymore Hall welcomed the girl with glowing hands and a forbidden birthmark. Not Lady Seraphina Duskmore. She had been watching. Waiting. And now she moved. Seraphina stood at the highest window of her chambers, overlooking the lower courtyard, where a covered carriage waited, readying for its return to the capital. She sipped spiced wine from a crystal goblet, the bitter flavor a poor companion to her bitter thoughts. The masquerade had changed everything. Whispers had spread fast, about the mysterious young woman in the midnight blue gown, dancing in the arms of the Duke. A seamstress, they said. A commoner. Worse yet, some said they saw her glow. That was no small rumor. In a kingdom like Eldoria, where magic among commoners was feared more than fire, such a whisper could ruin reputations, or end lives. And still, Brandon protected her. Seraphina's jaw tightened. They were betrothed. Their union had been arranged when they were children, a strategic alliance between two powerful noble houses. She had waited, watched, endured his cold detachment for years, knowing one day she would have his title, his lands, and perhaps, eventually, his heart. But then she came. That girl. That nobody from the gutters of Windmere, with her humble manners and trembling magic. Seraphina had seen girls like her before. She knew the type, soft-voiced, doe-eyed, always pretending not to want the power they chased. But Madeline was different. Not just clever. Not just beautiful. Dangerous. And Seraphina would not let her ruin everything. Madeline stood alone in her room, staring down at the completed coat. It was done. The formal garment shimmered faintly under the light, the silver thread embroidery catching every shift of the air. She had added one final detail along the inner lining, a constellation pattern matching the one on her birthmark, a hidden message only Brandon would understand. But now that it was finished, she felt empty. Power crackled inside her in ways she could no longer suppress. Sometimes the windows misted when she was angry. Candles flared when she was afraid. Even the stitching needle had begun to obey her will without touch. Her magic wasn't a secret anymore, not from herself, and not from the house. She feared it was only a matter of time before someone acted on it. As if summoned by thought, the door creaked open behind her. Madeline turned, and froze. Lady Seraphina stood there, dressed in morning black that shimmered like oil. She did not smile. "I thought we should speak privately," Seraphina said, stepping inside. Madeline stiffened. "If you've come to threaten me again—" "I've come to explain what you don't seem to understand," Seraphina interrupted coolly. "You are a distraction. An infatuation. A momentary indulgence. But you are not part of this world." "I didn't ask to be," Madeline said softly. "No. But you've made yourself very comfortable in it." Seraphina's heels clicked across the floor as she circled the table, her fingers grazing the coat. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You know, this is exquisite work," she said. "And it won't save you." Madeline met her gaze. "I don't need saving." "Oh, darling," Seraphina laughed. "You have no idea what's coming, do you?" She leaned closer, voice dropping. "I've already spoken to members of the council. There are laws about this sort of thing, magic among the lower classes. You could be arrested. Tried. Executed. Or worse, sent to one of the containment academies in the north. Do you think Brandon's name will protect you when they come?" Madeline's hands curled into fists. "You want me gone." "I want order," Seraphina hissed. "I want what was promised. And I will not let some back-alley enchantress unravel everything I've waited for." For a moment, the room trembled, ever so slightly. The air thickened. Candles flickered. Seraphina noticed. "You're not just dangerous," she whispered. "You're unstable." Madeline stepped forward, trembling, but her voice was steady. "I didn't choose to be born like this. I didn't choose to be hunted. But I will choose what I become." Seraphina's lip curled. Brandon returned from his war room late, weariness lining his face. He expected solitude. Instead, he found Madeline waiting in the Duke's garden, her dress torn at the hem, her hair wild from the wind. "She knows," Madeline said as he approached. His face darkened. "Seraphina. She threatened me. And she's contacted the council." Brandon inhaled sharply, rage flashing in his eyes. "She's dangerous," Madeline said, voice breaking. "But I don't want to run anymore." Brandon looked at her a long moment. "Then don't," he said. "Stay. You could lose everything." He stepped closer. "Then let it be lost." And in that instant, beneath the garden's silver-leafed branches, the weight of everything unspoken between them swelled. Madeline didn't move. And neither did he. But the moment held the shape of a promise. And from the shadows of the manor, Seraphina watched. Chapter 8, The Scroll in the Library. The following morning arrived cloaked in low gray clouds, and the air hung heavy with the scent of rain and roses. The garden, usually a place of quiet escape, felt different now, charged. The moment between Brandon and Madeline the night before had not ended with a kiss or confession, but something deeper, more dangerous, a decision. They would not run. They would stand. And with that resolve came the need for truth. Madeline knew the answers she needed were buried somewhere in Greymoor Hall. And so, while the Duke handled urgent affairs in the council chamber, she returned to the place that had first revealed her legacy, the library. This time, she didn't sneak. She walked in through the front hall, past the manor's wary servants and the judgmental glances of passing nobles, chin lifted and heart steady. Let them talk. Let them wonder. She had no more room for shame. She searched for hours. The ancient shelves groaned under the weight of dusty tomes and brittle parchment. Volumes on court history, magical theory, noble house bloodlines. Most were of no use, incomplete, sanitized versions of the truth, written by those who feared the very magic she carried. But then she saw it. Tucked between two thick ledgers, near the bottom of a forgotten shelf, was a scroll. Not a book, a sealed scroll, bound with deep blue ribbon bearing a crescent moon sigil. She paused. That sigil, she had seen it once before, in the dream she'd had as a child, the night her mother died. A dream of fire, silver stars, and a woman whispering, "You are not lost. You are hidden." Her fingers trembled as she pulled the scroll free. The seal broke with a soft pop of static air, the unmistakable echo of warded magic. This scroll had been hidden on purpose, protected. Madeline sat at the long oak table and gently unrolled it. The script was ancient but legible, inked in a language now used only by court historians and old mages. But she could read it. Somehow, she could understand every word as if it had been written for her alone. The line of starlight, a record of the last starborn. In the year 1063 of the third flame, the house of Celestra was extinguished by royal decree. Its last heirs, Ceres and Alia of starborn blood, were condemned for magical crimes, though no evidence was ever produced. Their child, a daughter, vanished into shadow before the execution. Her name was struck from the records. But prophecy lingers. The starborn line cannot be fully extinguished, only scattered. It is written, "One shall awaken in a time of turmoil, a child marked by flame and born under the moon's eclipse. Her birth shall split kingdoms. Her power shall unseat tyrants. And she will not rise alone." Madeline stared at the final line. A sharp pain bloomed behind her eyes, a memory, or perhaps something older, something buried. Her vision blurred and the scroll shimmered faintly in the light. "You will not rise alone." She sat back, heart pounding. She was the child. The scroll didn't just confirm her lineage, it confirmed her destiny. A destiny she had never asked for, never imagined, but one that had already begun to pull her forward, step by step. She thought of Brandon. Of the garden. Of the dance. Of the way the world had started shifting beneath her feet the moment they met. And she realized with a jolt. He was part of this. Not just as an ally or protector. He was written into it. He would rise with her, or fall beside her. A voice startled her. "You shouldn't be in here alone." She turned sharply. It was Magister Elias, the old advisor who had served the Vine family since before Brandon was born. His white beard flowed down over his robes, and his cane tapped once against the stone floor. "I was searching for truth," Madeline said cautiously. Elias stepped closer, gaze lingering on the unrolled scroll. "And you found it. You knew," she said. "About the starborn." He nodded slowly. "There are few of us left who remember the truth, fewer still willing to speak it. Why was it hidden?" "Because men fear what they cannot control," Elias said simply. "And the starborn could never be controlled. Your mother, Alia, was the last of them. Until now." Madeline swallowed. "She died when I was a child. I remember fire. Screaming. And someone hiding me." "That someone was your mother," Elias said softly. "She cloaked you in magic and entrusted you to the midwife in Windmere. I was the one who carried you there. I swore an oath to her before she died." Madeline stared at him, stunned. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because the moment I did, your life would no longer be your own," he said. "And now, I fear, that time has already come." He looked down at the scroll, then back at her. "You are not just a girl with magic, Madeline. You are a beacon. A spark that will set fire to a kingdom that has long forgotten how to burn. She looked down at her hands. They'll come for me. Yes, Elias said. And you must be ready when they do. Madeline sat alone in her chambers, scroll rolled and hidden again in her sewing bag, the words etched into her mind. She felt different now. Not powerful, not yet. But aware. Awake. The magic inside her no longer frightened her. It was wild, yes. But it was hers. A birthright denied, now reclaimed. And somewhere in the vast manor, Brandon Vine was fighting his own battles, in council chambers, in secret meetings, and perhaps even in his heart. She wondered if he knew just how deeply his fate was now tied to hers. From the window, the moon rose, full and pale, watching her like an old friend. And beneath it, Madeline Dawson, daughter of the starborn, began to sew a different kind of thread. Not cloth. Destiny.
Across every empire, every forgotten age, stories still whisper. If this tale stirred your spirit, leave a like to honor the echoes of the past. Share your thoughts in the comments. Every voice weaves a new legend into the sands of time. And subscribe to our YouTube channel Historical Fantasy Stories, where myths walk beside history, and every discovery changes the world. The next forgotten legend is waiting to be found.